sorry, Reverend Onifade, in Osun State, do we still have schools owned by religious bodies?
That's a very good question. I want to ask you also, do we still have schools named after the religious bodies?
Yeah, sir.
Do we still have?
We're talking about ownership now. Let's start from there, because with this document that is also gazetted, it's talking about public schools.
Public schools, talking about Muslim public schools, Christian public schools.
When we say Muslim public schools, Christian public schools, the question is it still operational in Osun State that we have government-owned schools that are for any religious organization?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. That's a good question. And what I want to ask them, what is ownership? When you talk of ownership, you're talking of who are running the schools. There is nowhere in the whole world where government alone runs schools. In the whole world, up to today. And because of the appreciation and the recognition of such a thing, that was why the governor, we can never forget, set the pace for such of recognition and return of schools back to the owners. Asiwaju Ahmed Tinubu is a wonderful governor, a man we cannot forget. He said
was a governor for
in Lagos State.
I thought he was governor
in Lagos State.
Okay.
He did it, and go and see what is happening today to the glory of God. You see, so ownership, when you talk of ownership, to run a school, you have to recognize the parents, recognize the institutions that have established those schools. Government has its own role to play up to today. That's why we have PA or PT, whichever name you call them, in the schools up to today.
Okay.
So that is it.
Probably to just bring this in, because we'll still go back to that. I mean, give us the entire picture, because when the government came in Osun State, they say they were not happy with what they've seen, the state of education in the schools. I mean, that was in 2010. They had this education summit, they called stakeholders, they explained to everybody what they wanted to do with this reclassification. And as such, they restructured the schools, I think the elementary, middle school, high school, as obtaining the claims, as they say, to the extent that everyone was now wearing the same uniform, correct? So what has gone wrong with that policy? What is your bone of contention?
Well, as Christian Association of Nigeria, and based on the memory lane you are trying to open, which I've been discussing extensively in one of their meetings, and public declaration like this some time ago. What I want to know about that one is that, as I've said, it's not to discuss the government, but the implementer.
Who is the implementer?
Well, maybe a group of people set up by the government. By them out.
What do they call them?
I can't remember the name they call them now. They have a school, they have a discipline, or sort of committees like that, handling some of those things. Nonetheless, the fact of the matter there is that the policy of classification and molding it up with the merger. You see, they call one classification. Classification is doing what they call starting classifying schools from grade 1 to grade 12, which is fundamental and peculiar as a state in Osun. I've not had that in Lagos State. I've not had that in Ondo State. But that is the government of the state of Osun as it is. So that's why I say I don't want to discuss that, because I'm not part of that thing. I'm not part of the decision when they were taking it. Number one. Number two is that when you talk of the merger now, in an attempt to carry out the classification, led to bringing schools together, merging schools together, taking school A, school B, which have been established with its own philosophy, operating with its own moral way of life. We have known some schools to be notorious, we have known some schools to be decent. We know that some schools will be a little bit tough.
So what is CAN against in all of this policy?
What CAN is trying to correct is that we must give respect to the way and manner, the administration of each of those schools before. Like in the mission schools now, where they have been taught to live, to be upright morally, where they have been taught to respect leaders, where they call values education, where they have been taught to maintain discipline and order. Unlike when you bring a child or students from other schools where they are unruly. And that is why we are going through what we are going through. Number one. Number two problem there is that schools where they are using hijab, they have been used to hijab. For them to be brought to a place where they have never been exposed to hijab for over 50 years, where the school tradition has never been wearing hijab, that is part of cancer situation. So,
if I'm getting you right, sir,
putting the culture of one school upon the other by the system has caused the problem.
so two things disturb CAN: the merger and hijab. Is that, am I?
Well, if you summarize it that way, I think that you are correct.
Why do these things bother you?
Well, it doesn't bother us because we think that if a place has been acculturated to a way of life, and another way of life that is injurious to life is brought to them, because when you talk of religion, religion is life.
Injurious?
Yes, injurious.
What is injurious in other students wearing a hijab?
Thank you. When we are talking of a system already established, a system already in operation, a system where you have never seen somebody dressing differently, a system where you have been trained to see that when you want to learn, you need a conducive environment to learn, a place where you have not been exposed to distraction. Imagine, that's why I'm saying that hijab is not our issue, in the sense that we are not here to be saying, don't do this, don't do that. But in the public schools that belong to the Christians, to where there, it's maybe...
You've used the word
injurious there.
You've used the word belong. My colleague asked you earlier about ownership, as to whether or not you still own some of the schools. You weren't quite clear on the line of ownership. You just said something as vague as, governments in the world don't run schools by themselves. One of the things that the Osun State government has brought out, where they brought out this entire policy on reclassification and remodeling and whatever else it is that they have brought, is that they were not satisfied with the state of the schools by whatever name they were called, and they thought that one of the ways to be efficient in running the system was to come up with what they had come up with, and they kept some of the names, according to them. They kept some of the names, but did some mergers here and there just to see how it is that they could run it efficiently, especially since they were running on government money. What do you have to say about that?
Thank you. You see, by ownership, we don't have problem with this government by ownership, because at the end of the day, he recognized the presence of the denominations, and he does not contend with that, and that's why I say it's part of the commendation. That's why you see up to today, with some of them bearing Anglicans, some of them bearing Baptists. You see, because right from the beginning, they were established and named and registered with that name.
And no one's contending that.
But did the Baptists hand over its school about almost 40 years ago to the government?
Did they hand over to the government?
Yes.
Nobody handed over any school to the government. It was taken over.
It was taken over
forcefully. You need to understand that tomorrow.
Was it forcefully taken over?
It was not handed over to anybody. Maybe the one took over, not handed over. And that is why you and I sought for, in prayer, to seek for a democratic governance, which we enjoy today, and to the glory of God over Nigeria. And that is why whatever military dictatorship has done that is not helpful to us, others have been doing. That's why I set the example of people like Tinubu and others. So I've been doing very well.
What I want to know, sir,